So here we are with another match in the Yamato. I've ended up on Fault Line, which is a pretty common map to get in higher tier battleships. Actually, it's fairly common at most tiers. It's not a bad map, although I must say some of the map selection gets a bit repetitive after a while. In battleships especially, you tend to get this, North, and the Arctic map, and not a whole lot else. On the other hand, it does give you a good sense of what to do. And on this map, in battleships, I generally tend to head towards the west end of the map, regardless of what mode, what game mode I'm playing, and try and duke it out across the open water to the west. As you can see, we actually have 2 Yamatos and an Amagi. The enemy have a Yamato and 2 Amagis, as well as an aircraft carrier. We have 4 cruisers, while they have 2 cruisers and a destroyer. I'm not going to say it's necessarily balanced, but I've certainly seen the matchmakers spit out worse, and at least we have the same number of players. Now you'll notice in chat people are complaining about the range on the Warspite's guns. I'll cover that very shortly because I did actually get myself a Warspite and I've got a couple of replays I'd like to record in it. So I'll be discussing the Warspite and particularly its gunnery range there. In the meantime, we've spotted 2 of the enemy battleships, 1 Amagi and their Yamato. We've got a bit of a potential clusterfuck going on here, but thankfully nobody rams each other. Looks like our cruisers are going to head towards the east, while our battleships make for the west. The enemy battleships, for their part, have had the same idea. Again, there's really nothing wrong with this idea, it's a pretty sound strategy. The only issue is you're going to have to hope your gunnery is accurate because there's not a whole lot of cover once you get out to the positions in the west. Speaking of accurate gunnery, that Amagi is now missing a lot of ship, which should make our lives a little bit easier. The second Amagi is spotted coming around the headland. I decided to go for him since he's following a fairly predictable path, and I'm hoping here that I've got the range right. You can see the travel time at this kind of range makes it quite frustrating to see the effect of your shells, but oh boy, that was a good broadside. And of course, me being the terrible sport and very, very fiercely competitive person I am, I immediately go straight to chat. That was more luck than skill, believe me. I am not running the aim assist mod. I've heard it's actually a detriment to people who know what they're doing anyway, so there's no point. That was just part skill, part luck. Sucks to be him, but oh well. I've had it happen to me once or twice, so it's like a rite of passage playing any ship really, but particularly battleships. And you can see in chat, nice hack there. No, I don't think so. Once again, this is what you can do with AP if you know how to aim it. It's also not the first time I've killed an Amagi at long range in a single salvo. The first time I did it was at about 20 kilometers. I was just outside his gun range, he hadn't opened fire on me yet, and I was able to land 9 hits, 8 of which went straight through his armor and hit his magazine. Now you can see the Yamato is actually fairly maneuverable for its size and its weight. You've got to remember this thing displaces about 70,000 tons from memory. It's not a light ship, nor is it a small ship, it's actually very, very large, but because it's got a nice wide beam on it, and because it's just a pretty well-designed ship, honestly, in terms of its sea handling characteristics, I'm sure there's a word for it, I can't think of it right now, it does actually maneuver quite nicely in-game. You can see the enemy team is starting to concentrate here in the west. This is why I come to this position. I tend to brawl in battleships more than snipe, so I like to get some effective shots in from long range and then close to close range and just smash people through their belts. And this is the perfect place to do it. You just have to have some teammates with you as well, so you aren't the sole thing being focused on, and you have to really hope your shots make themselves count. The remaining Amagi decides he doesn't want any of this and begins turning away. I do not blame him. But I do manage to land another 10,000 damage or so on top of him as he turns. An important thing to note in battleships is, while travelling in a straight line is dangerous because it makes you predictable, turning also makes you predictable, particularly because a lot of the battleships are quite slow and don't turn very well. Sorry, I'll use my words. So beware when you are turning. It makes it quite easy to predict exactly where to lead to land shots directly on top of you. Really, you don't want to be maneuvering out in the open. You also don't want to be travelling in a straight line out in the open. Don't be out in the open, pretty much. Or if you do have to be in the open, make sure you've got somebody with you and you're not the obvious sole target like this guy. As you can see, his other teammates are behind islands. There's only one person here we can really focus. It's this guy. Don't be this guy. Now the enemy Mogami does get a full spread of torps off as I land another 6,000 or so damage on the Amagi. I was a bit worried here, but the bulk of the torps are aimed too far back and miss. Take 2 hits, lose my steering, but my damage control team are all over it. And I also pop my repair. Now I shift targets to the Yamato. He is a much bigger threat to me right now than the Amagi. He's also a big threat to the other Yamato on my team, who is charging in head first. He does get a good shot in and blows the guy's magazines from the looks of it. And that leaves me free to worry about the Mogami. Now, the Amagi does have big guns, but the Mogami fires quite fast. It's very agile, so I'd like to kill him while he's still giving me the opportunity, and he also shits out torpedoes. Torpedoes are a very big threat to my existence, and so if I can remove him from the equation now before he can get another salvo of torpedoes off, or another spread, rather, that will be very much my interest. But he gets cleaned up by one of our Pensacola's, so no problems there. That leaves no targets except for the enemy destroyer, who is right up in our other Yamato's face, and the Amagi, who is making best speed back towards his own cap and the cover of the island nearby. The destroyer gets cleaned up by our Yamato. He was just too close at that range. The secondaries are going to tear you apart. And I'm hoping for a nice hit here. But it looks like the Amagi is beginning to reverse his turn, and sure enough, yes he is. I do land a single hit for a grand total of 686 damage. One of our cruisers is moving to put pressure on cap. Other Yamato sank. He must have been flooding from torpedoes, probably. Obviously, I didn't actually see what happened to him. I was kind of tunnel visioned on my own targets. And so myself and the remaining 3 cruisers begin laying into the Amagi. He's really caught in a bad spot. There's not much you can do about it. I managed to knock out one of his turrets. And at this range, although he can potentially put quite a bit of hurt on me, as you saw in one of my Amagi videos where I knocked half the health off a Yamato. Actually, wow, more than half the health off a Yamato. This thing got a huge... Oh, never mind. No, I'm wrong. The HUD was bugged out. I was going to say this thing got a massive hit point nerf, but then I realised it was just the HUD playing up. My bad. Yeah. So, the Amagi can actually seriously hurt these things, but he needs to be at the right range to do it. He needs to have good aim to do it. And in this case, I've just got too many hit points. It's unlikely he's going to be able to finish me unless he lands a full broadside on my magazines. So at this stage, it's just myself and the cruisers trying to slowly knock his hit points down as he runs for dear life at the sluggish pace the Amagi can manage. So I believe about 25 or 26 knots. It's not very fast. It certainly doesn't like turning. The Yamato, although it's much bigger, feels much more agile. Land a couple hits there. 3,500 damage is nothing to a battleship, but at least it's giving me a good idea where I want to be aiming, and it's also putting some pressure on him. Meanwhile, the cruisers are actually landing some hits as well. He is quite low in health though, so a 3,500 damage hit right now is certainly not a bad thing. You can see one of the cruisers just landed a decent broadside, all things told. And the Amagi once again reverses his turn just enough to avoid getting hit by my broadside. He also manages to evade the cruiser broadsides there as well. At this stage though, the match is a foregone conclusion pretty much.